Hi, this is Christopher, and the project that I chose was to present Apache Flume using Hadoop. So the agenda, like I mentioned, so I'm gonna go over what is Flume, what is needed to get started to use it. Gonna go over the architecture, how it's built and how it works, the pros and cons of it, why it's used, and how it works with some small examples of the configuration, and then I'm gonna finish it off by doing the installation. So what is Flume? Flume is a distributing system that collects aggregates and moves large amounts of log data from different distributed sources to a centralized data source, which is basically coming straight from the website. I just copy and paste it there for Apache Flume. And what that summarizes to me is that you're moving a certain amount of data, specific data from a web server, and you're moving it to the Hadoop file system. So basically moving from one place to another. Okay, so in order to install Flume, need to have a runtime environment of Java of 1.8 or later, because you use certain libraries to do the work, and you need to obviously have sufficient memory in your system, enough disk space. You need to be able to read and write as you are transferring data from one point to the other, and you have to have Hadoop distributed file systems. So you see here, the web server is actually where the data is stored. So if you have something like one example I read is moving like Facebook or Twitter. They have other data on web servers. So you're trying to move it over to a distributed file system. You will use Flume, and it will go through this process. So the web server goes through the source, and the source is sort of where the data will be coming from, which feeds into the channel. And the channel acts a bit as a buffer, so it holds, it's basically holding the all the data that it was transferred over uh, from the web server through the source. And then once the data needs to be transferred over to HDFS, um, there's a section, the sync, which is removing the data that's stored in the channel, which, as mentioned, is channel is a buffer of holding all the data, and transfers it over and throws it into the HDFS, um, to finally have your data in that file system. Agent is the whole process of getting the data, putting it in a buffer, and then distributing in the file system that you want it in. Some of the strong points of using Flume is the reliability, because the events are staged in the channel, each agent, and then it's delivered to the next agent by a hop or the repository, such as HDFS. The events are only removed from the channel after they have passed onto the next one or the repository. They use a transaction approach to reliably deliver, and also is easy to recover since the events are staged in a channel that is backed up by a local file system. So there's something else called multiplexing. So you can actually use uh, you know different agents to distribute the data in different file systems. So it supports multiple destinations, and you just have to create different channels where the source is coming from. So for the first example at the top, you have one source, so one web server that feeds the data into different buffers, and you have different additional syncs because the syncs will distribute the data in different file systems. So it can be HDFS or JMS or any other file system that you wish to put this in. And also each of these large agent has their own agents within it. So the way that this works in order to use Flume is you have to have a configuration file that has certain Java properties. So you can have configuration for multiple agents. Just as the previous example, you'll need the configuration to control all those agents in different file systems. So you have to give values to the source, the sink, and the channel which each have a name and a type and certain set properties that are required in order for this to work. So the agent needs to know all the components to load, how they are configured in the flow, and the agent needs to know the channels where the source and sink connect into the file system, and configuration file would take care of this. So basically you need to give it a name, where the source is coming from, the data, what data type it is, the size or how much you're trying to distribute. There's a lot of different components that need to be uh, named and assigned values, as we will see in the following example. So this is an example of a configuration file for just one agent, a single node. So here we have one that is called A1. So A1 needs to be given a source, a sink, and a channel. In this example, we just have R1, K1, C1, and then you need to provide additional information for the source, the sink, and the channel. So in this example, we have the type is a netcat, and how it's binding through the local host, and we are assigning the port, so where the data will be coming from then through that channel. And also you have here the channel, the type of channel, and the capacity, and the transaction capacity. Here's just another example of the different flows and assigning the source and the sinks and the channels and their types and their name. So once you have that configuration file, you can start actually do the movement from the data. So you will run this script. As an example of the script is a shell script called Flume ng located in the bin folder, and the agent will start running the source and sink based on the specific configuration file. So the example is just here is gives you what the command will be to transfer that data to a certain sink or file system. All right, so now that I went through that, I'm going to do just an example of installing Flume, and just getting to know a little bit better of my understanding through this process. To go to Apache flume.org and download the tar bin file. So I'll show you. So here, I had to download the Apache Flume 1.11.0 bin tar gz, and then what I did is I extracted the files in the Hadoop folder that we made previously. So I'll show you here. User local Hadoop, and you see it here. Hopefully it's not too small. There it is. And then what I had to do, an export the bin of the home directory of the bin file folder. So I had to do it underneath my profile. So in my home directory, so I added export home Flume and where my extracted tar gz file was located. And then I added to my path at the very end, I added the path to the bin. So then I did that. Once I did that, I ran source.profile to make sure it takes effect, and then the command to check the version that is actually there installed. And that tells me that it's there installed. So now I have to go into the com folder that is located there. So So yeah, we have the conf folder there. So I go in there, and then this is where I create my configuration file that I will be able to use Flume. So I already created one. I named it testflume.conf. So we open it. And it's here. So I made a small little example to show that I'm going to extract a file that's in downloads log.log into my sync, which is going to be our Hadoop HDFS under the folder that's going to be created called Flume 01. And you see I named the sync HDFS, the channel min channel, and the source as an example. So the source example, the type, this is where the file is going to come from, is the channel, make sure the channels are matching. And then I have the sync where it's going to land, that what type of data is going to be written as a text, and then it's going to be under this folder. And then at the very end, you have the configuration of the channel. So that's that. So once I do that, I want to show you that what's in my Hadoop HDFS. So right now, as you see, I do not have the Flume 01 folder. But now I'm going to call this command here to do the work, to bring my log file that's in downloads and bring it over to HDFS. So right here I have the command, the flume ng, and under the agent, and then I'm using the configuration file, and which is located under my Apache Flume folder conf directory, and I named it test.conf, and then the name of my agent, if you remember in my configuration file, I named it agent1, and then I call this to print out some statements once it's completed. So then I run it. And as you see here at the very end, it tells me that it was successful and that it created the folder, and it's in the file is called Flume data. So now I get to exit out of here, Control C, and now I run the same command, see if it's there. And there you have it, Flume 01. And then if I do fs ls.flume01, and there you have it. It created a file where all the data was brought in. And then I want to see, I wrote inside that file a very short sentence. So let's see what it was. So do fs cats flume01. There you go. It was Flume test that was in my file. And we can check this as well. If there you go, Flume test. So we were able to successfully bring in the file log.log into my HDFS using Flume. So in summary, you saw that Hadoop can bring in various files, logs, any sort of data from a web server into HDFS. My example was a very simple one, taking it from one place in my machine and my local directory into HDFS, but you can bring it in from anywhere. You just have to make sure you add the correct values to your source, your channel, your sync, to make sure it comes from the proper place into HDFS. Flume has become very important as I've come to learn that it's making it very easy and simple and efficient to process large amount of data files or logs or whatever you want into HDFS to take advantage of those capabilities. And my personal thoughts is I think it was a great learning experience of other sub projects that are out there that enables the power of Hadoop and HDFS. So this was pretty rewarding knowing that I can do this on my own installation and do an example. And it's a great learning experience, even though it took longer than a regular lecture to learn. But overall, I think Flume is a very good, useful tool to bring in large data into HDFS.